Welcome to the Reason Roundtable. This is your weekly review of news and culture from the editors of Reason Magazine. If you're tired of the terrible options offered by today's politics, you have come to the right place. I'm your host, Peter Suderman, and today I'm joined by my colleagues, Catherine Mengue-Ward, Matt Welch, and Nick Gillespie. So normally this is the spot in the show where I say, Happy Monday. But this is not a happy Monday. Last week, as you surely know, conservative political commentator and student organizer Charlie Kirk was murdered. He was shot on a college campus in Utah while debating politics and ideas. It is just a tragic and terrible event, and it's terrible in a way that words can't fully express, but we're going to try this week. Our hearts go out to his family and everyone who knew him. So there is a suspect in custody, as you have also probably heard. It's a 22-year-old named Tyler Robinson, also from Utah. Shooter wrote messages on the bullet casings of his gun. And while there are still many questions and arguments going on about the particulars of the shooter's worldview and motive, Utah Governor Spencer Cox has said that Kirk's assassin was, quote, deeply indoctrinated with leftist ideology. So this just seems like a really fraught moment for America, for politics, and for speech. There's been a lot of discussion about cancel culture, which we're going to get to in a little while here, but I think a lot of people are just angry and others are despairing. And I know I have been actually kind of upset for the last couple of days. Probably spent too much time on social media and that didn't help. But I just want to start by asking everybody here, how are you feeling? What do you make of all this? What does all of this mean? Catherine, let's go with you.
I guess I am I feel a little bit detached from it the more it becomes a story about social media bad behavior and sort of people fishing around to vindicate their ideologies. That first moment after he was shot and everyone just watched him get shot, including here in the Reason office where we all gathered around and looked at that video because it was there and it felt like cowardice not to look at it. It felt kind of very real and very human and very direct. And now it feels to me like everyone has fallen back on their old bad habits of using a tragedy to pursue their own ends. And so I'm kind of concerned about us being not those guys on this podcast today.
Nick, you want to be not those guys for our listeners here? How are you feeling?
The horror of the violence, both the setting as well as the visuals, being on a college campus while, engaging in, kind of a spirited conversation with people who disagree with you. That's just terrifying. And there's no way we should turn away from that. And we need to always be absolutely repudiating political violence. What worries me as time goes on, and this actually in a way picks up on what Catherine was saying, is the speed with which, to be honest, the Trump administration and people on the conservative side are using this now to start attacking things like social media, things like this vague left-wing rhetoric of, terror or whatever. I am worried now that what happens oftentimes when there is a political tragedy, a political event, that the cure to it, the fix to it ends up being worse than the act itself in terms of things like civil liberties and whatnot. So Spencer Cox, the Utah governor, was all over the Sunday morning shows, and he said many good things, including that this is a time for us not to be engaging in inflaming political polarization and things like that. But he kept coming back to talking about how the problem here is social media and the way that is creating a polarized America, et cetera, especially among young people. I think that's not only not clear, but it's dangerous rhetoric. In opposition to that, Jared Polis was also on the Sunday morning shows, and he actually took a much more measured sense to all of this. And he talked about how when people are violent, they are ultimately, the individuals are responsible, not social media and not the rhetoric that they may or may not have been imbibing, because it's not even clear what's going on. So I'm saddened, I'm disgusted, and I'm also deeply worried about what comes down the pike.
Yeah. So, you mentioned the responses here and it's sort of the push to do a lot of the proposals that we have seen that have been quite illiberal. And I just think it's obviously true that there is a huge amount of illiberalism in the policy ideas that have been floated all over, especially by people on the right. At the same time, you said you worried that these responses might be worse than the actual event itself. And I don't know if I quite agree with that. I guess I would say that I think they would be non-responsive. They might end up producing bad effects while also not stopping the thing that they are nominally supposed to stop. Matt, have you been spending a huge amount of time on social media marinating in all this? Because I'll tell you, as much as I agree with Nick that social media is not something you want to clamp down on, the problem here isn't, that people are speaking their minds. I spent the weekend marinating in social media to see what people were saying because I have to host a podcast, because I need to know, because I want to know. And it's awful. It's just totally awful what is going on social media right now. If you can stay off of it, I recommend that you do. Matt Welch?
I did.
Good job.
With a small, little dipping the toe in to watch how much has it curdled since yesterday. I think that we spent a lot of time, the global American discoursal, we kind of working back through causality and then saying that's not the cause, that's the wrong way of looking at it. And that's important, but I think it also is a way to not insert oneself into the responsibility chain for creating a better kind of way of talking about and acting in politics. Which is to say, like, if we actually acted as if political violence and the growing threat of political violence was a problem, an oppressing and worrying problem, and I think it is, how would you act? And individually, how would you act? And I don't think that the answer to that is by going on social media 7 hours a day. I'm actually pretty confident that, well, I mean, not like that's an answer of how you would act, but it's not an answer of how you should act. It's not a great.
But for a lot of people, that's just what they do every single day, whether or not Charlie Kirk has
and
been
it's
shot.
a mistake. Social media is a mistake. It's not was a mistake. I'm glad that it exists, but it is a mistake as a primary conduit from which to receive factual information about politics. If that is the majority of your intake of your stream, and it's the majority of mine, to be clear, it's a mistake for me. Thankfully, I spent most of this weekend touching grass and going out in the world, and it was a much better place, including talking to a guy who's never been on social media in his whole life, and that was totally fascinating. But it's a mistaken way to consume information and also to get any kind of idea about what the real world looks like. The amount of hatred organization that has gone on in response to this over the last 4 or 5 days is astonishing to watch it kind of unspool in real time. People are talking themselves into the belief that since we have access to the innermost thoughts of all kinds of people that we didn't have access to, their thoughts, back when Ronald Reagan got shot or other things in history, and we see that, and it's awful. And most people have had examples of those thoughts being shared, those kind of like, oh, he had it coming, what do you expect? Or like, that was great. Because we see some of those in our normal life, and because other people are out there just scraping the world for those things and then presenting them in your Twitter feed, you have this notion, which I think is hyperbolic, exaggerated, and also inaccurate and dangerous to believe in, that there are millions of people out there who want you dead, that this big block of they are coming to get you. And I get that, like, that is that is on some level a normal response to have when someone has been murdered and assassinated for engaging in speech, which is kind of different. The political assassinations are always bad of anybody, politicians, but it's pretty rare that it happens to a non-politician participant in the system, whether a journalist or an activist or whatever. It's pretty rare. We've had some, but not a whole lot. So it feels different, but people are whipping themselves up into this and then debating whether your reaction is correct and all the usual kind of meta BS that we see on social media. It's a mistaken way to go through and to process this information in a useful way, and it's a very mistaken way if your goal is to reduce the possibility of violence in this country.
I want to bring Nick in on this because it seems like he's got something to say. But my question for you, Matt Welch, maybe my question for all of you here is, Matt, you just said that if you're on social media all the time, that is not a good way to get factual information about the world, right? This is a kind of a restatement of the internet is not real life. And yet, two things. One is the social media delivered a huge amount of information, some of it quite wrong, some of it very mistaken, but very rapidly. If you wanted to consume all of the things that people were saying about Charlie Kirk and about the murder there, and to kind of learn very quickly, social media was not necessarily a bad way to just learn about it, and also at the same time to learn what other people were thinking. And this is, I think, if you want to know what the sort of views of a certain strain of conservative are, if you want to know what a certain strain of leftist is thinking about this, then social media is the place that you go. And this is actually one of the things that Jared Polis said in his remark was, we should focus on condemning the killer and condemning the killing, condemning the senseless act of violence rather than social media, because social media is just the place where people talk. And because it is the place where people talk, then if you are interested in what people are saying about politics, that is the place you go. And the second thing that I would just say here is the shooter himself appears to have been quite radically online. I mean, there's a bunch of stuff we don't know here, but the messages, the only things that we have that have come directly from the shooter are the messages on the bullet casings. And those reference kind of online memes related to the gaming world. And you can make whatever you want out of them politically, but this suggests that he himself was targeting an online audience and an online discourse. Matt, Nick, what do you guys think?
I'll let Nick take this one.
No, I agree with you, Peter. I don't understand the idea of, a massive major news event has happened. And so the response is, hey, you know what, Matt, and I'm busting your chops here a bit, but it's like, go talk to people who don't keep up with the news. I'm sorry, I disagree with that. I consume a lot of social media, even calling things social media. That is just creating an abstraction out of very discrete news sources that are online. One of the things that I found on my Twitter feed was by Alex Nowrasteh of the Cato Institute, who has been, over the past almost 10 years, has been doing charts of political violence, acts of political violence, and whether or not they code right or left or, in whatever ideology. I found that incredibly useful, partly because, among other things, it shows how political violence is not as big a thing as we think. If we're talking about people being killed for explicitly political reasons, and that was helpful to me. Okay, it was helpful to me in terms of framing this. It's helpful to understand what comes next, because everybody, and I don't know of any major political figure who has said, you know what, oh good, this happened to Charlie Kirk. Everybody is, horrified by it. Everybody is rightly horrified by it. The question then becomes, what are the policies that are going to be implemented in the end of this? And Peter, to your point about the writings on the shell casings and things like that, what seems to be emerging, and we don't really have any good information. We don't have any information about Trump's assassin, which is disturbing. The fact that we just don't know much about him at all. But what is emerging is somebody who had some kind of mental breakdown when they went to college, somebody who was struggling with life, and somebody who seems to be terminally, if not online, living in a meme world that may or may not even have an ideology behind it. This seems to be the case, and we might be looking at a replay of somebody like Jared Loughner, the person who shot Gabby Giffords and a bunch of other people, where at first it appeared to be an ideologically motivated act, and it is actually simply the act of a madman. And there is not really a lot that we can glean out of that.
So you say may or may not be ideological. So that allows for the possibility that it is. And my read, which is very speculative, very tentative at this point,
let me
and
put
could
it
change
this way.
2 hours before this podcast goes up. But just real quick, my read on him is not that he was simply a madman, not that he was incoherent and sort of you can't even figure out what he was thinking in the way that, say, Jared Loughner is, but that he was somebody who was very online and had a kind of online ironist's sense of politics, probably with a kind of left-leaning valence, but not in the sort of basic, like, oh, you're a New York Times reading, MSNBC watching left type, right? Like, it's something else. It's not even Mamdani and the DSA type of leftism, right? It's something else, something weirder, something harder to comprehend, something that goes through, that is sort of the domain of the young, that is also the domain of the very online, and people who often kind of live these outsider lives that don't get covered and don't sort of make their way into the kind of conventional political discourse. But that doesn't mean that there's no ideology, that there's no worldview, or that this was simply a crazy person.
I'm slow to both disagree with you, but also endorse what you're saying, because to say there's an ideology or that it turns out that he liked a certain kind of left-wing commentary, are we saying then that commentary is responsible for his actions, any more than, Mark David Chapman or John Hinckley Jr., because they had obsessions, those people were responsible for that. So I don't know.
To be clear, the rhetoric, leftist rhetoric, even rhetoric that I strongly disagree with, even stuff that sort of, I think, crosses a line. Leftist rhetoric is not responsible when an individual pulls the trigger. The individual is responsible. We've got to take a break here, and we'll come back. I want to go back to Catherine and ask her about something she said early on here. All right. Do you like great debates? Then check out the next Reason Versus, which is a debate series that pits Reason versus other folks in a battle of big ideas. On October 2nd, Reason is taking on National Review. The resolution is mass immigration is good for America. Your friends from Reason, Catherine Mangue-Ward and Alex Nowrasteh of the Cato Institute, think it is good for America. Rich Lowry and Ramesh Ponnuru of National Review will argue that it isn't. I'm going to moderate. The debate will be held at Hook Hall in Washington, D.C. on Thursday, October 2nd. Remember, because this is a debate, there will be a winner chosen by the audience. So come out, support your folks, listen to a great argument. For more information, go to reason.com/events. We'll be back in a moment. This is an advertisement from BetterHelp. Look, we all turn to some funny places for support. I sometimes talk to my dogs when I'm having trouble. They're big bull mastiffs and they have these great eyes and they're very cute, but they're not therapists. And the thing is, sometimes the person you talk to, sometimes the dog you talk to, isn't somebody who can actually give you really good advice. And for that, you might try to find your right match with BetterHelp. Look, we have all done something like this before. You talk to the barista at the coffee shop. You talk to a friend, a random stranger. You want to talk about relationships, about your anxiety, about depression, about other clinical issues, and they may not have the right answers. And so if you want someone who is a specialist, who is a professional, you can get guidance from a credentialed therapist online with BetterHelp. Look, there's a lot of benefits to something like Benefit. There's flexibility. It's completely online. You can pause your subscription whenever you need it. Switch therapists at any time with no extra cost. There's over 30,000 therapists. BetterHelp is the world's largest online therapy platform, serves over 5 million people globally, and it is convenient. You can join a session with a therapist at the click of a button, helping you fit therapy into your busy life. Plus, switch therapists at any time. So as the largest online therapy provider in the world, BetterHelp can provide access to mental health professionals with a diverse variety of experience. Find the one with BetterHelp. Our listeners get 10% off their first month at betterhelp.com/roundtable. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/roundtable. All right, Catherine, I want to go back to you because it seems like one of the things that's happened here is something you said in less than a week. This has become a kind of omni-issue. The Kirk shooting has swept up every other possible issue in the discourse. Shooting touches just so many of our flashpoint debates, right? Just off the top of my head, free speech and cancel culture, gun violence, social media, online radicalism, video games, and whether they're causing problems. I've definitely seen some of that. Trans issues, because there are reports now in major media outlets that Tyler Robinson may have been in a relationship with a roommate who is trans person undergoing a male to female transition. You have boys, the masculinity crisis, the MAGA right divides. Maybe he's a left groiper, I have seen people say. Toxic leftism, the culture of violence or violent ideology that is tolerated on the left. Again, these are all things that people are saying. And then there's even been some discussion about whether maybe this was motivated by concerns about Israel, Palestine, just because that seems to be the sort of thing that people want to talk about right now. And it just feels like every single major discourse bullet point of the last 5 years has already been redone through a Charlie Kirk lens. So, Catherine, what do you make of that? Well, why are people sort of so quick to attach whatever it is that they're already thinking about to an event like this?
Because they were already thinking about it, and because we're pattern-making animals. I truly think it's not much more complicated than that to understand. And it's never waste a crisis. Like, if there is one thing about our politics that just comes up over and over and over, it is Rahm Emanuel's absolutely cynical statement that we should never waste a crisis. And this is a crisis, right? This is a full-fledged classic. Everyone's upset and everyone wants to do something type of crisis. And then everyone just brings their own lens to it. And we're doing that too, right? Like the thing that we have said here, which, what am I worried about the most? It's all of the bad policies that are being proposed in the wake of this, because people don't want to waste a crisis. And, I think it's, you see this more and more when there is a single incident, whatever it is, that dominates the news. People just kind of stick onto it. It reminds me of, back in the 90s when you would have like the World Trade Organization protests, and then there would just be kind of little clusters of people that would show up for all their various causes and like trail onto those big marches. And that's just all of our politics, but it's very convenient to do it online now. It's sort of annoying to go to Seattle with your Free Mumia sign, but it's very, very convenient to just post on Twitter with your Free Mumia sign. And so I think that's where we are.
Wait, so is that a little bit of skepticism of social media, I hear?
I think it's social media's fault thing is inevitable given where we are in the discourse. Sorry about that phrase. And also, one thing that I'm struck by is the fact that the things that people are saying are evidence that he is extremely online are all things that are also part of the culture in my life of like 10-year-old boys who don't even have a phone. Like it's just like you can be part of meme culture. You can be part of kind of video game influenced, shorthand. You can be a part of all of that literally without even being fully online. And so, I do think this is now and always like, don't blame the technology. So don't blame the guns. Don't blame the video games. Don't blame the social media. I think that's
what you're kind of saying is that the internet is real life here. Nick, jump in.
No, to follow up on this, though, the day after Kirk was assassinated, Donald Trump, in a comments that he put out via Truth Social and whatnot, directly said radical left political violence is the result of the rhetoric of that. Is directly responsible for the killing, and that he is going to go after all of the practitioners of that, including the nonprofits and the organizations that support that. Earlier in late August, he talked about how the FCC should go after ABC News and NBC News because they are not actual news organizations, but they're political entities and things like that. That's what I'm concerned about. Because this is a horrible tragedy. I don't think it is the beginning of a wave of political violence, and I'm happy to talk about why that is the case. But the direct result of this, we are being told by the president, who is very online, who has talked about regulating social media as well as traditional media and legacy media. We've heard Spencer Cox, the Utah governor, who leads a state that has been trying to age gate and ban porn and do other kinds of social media regulation, saying we are going to regulate. We have to regulate social media. That worries me. And that's the thing that I'm fixating on now. Not because weird edgelords are saying unspeakable, horrible things that are demonstrably wrong or speculative, but because the people who are leading our political, who lead the government are saying this is what we are going to be doing over the next few weeks.
Special notice definitely to Pete Hegseth on this one, I think, who has said that the Pentagon is tracking very closely any civilian or military employee who is a Kirk detractor or celebrated his death to impose punishment. Like, this is, it's just, that is the kind of thing you would say if you have a very limited fundamental understanding of both your role as defense secretary and also
war secretary. Secretary of War, and also just like what the parameters are of free speech in America. We're doing the same thing. Deputy Secretary of State has said the same thing about people who are foreign residents here on visas, whatever. They will be their status will be reviewed if they are found to be praising, rationalizing, or making light of Kirk's killing. That is the kind of nitty gritty that certainly seems more salient than what are people doing on Discord.
Yeah, so let's talk about the kind of policy responses that have been proposed here. I think it does start with Trump, and Trump saying things like the problem is on the left, it's not on the right, like what some people say. That's a Trump quote from a pro-Trump account, tweeted this out. When you look at the agitators, Trump said, you look at the scum that speaks so badly of our country, the American flag burnings all over the place. That's the left, not the right. And so there's this effort from the presidency, from the White House, to paint the left, the radical left, whatever it is, as anti-American and violently anti-American in a way that needs a response. And then you see sort of downstream of that, you see conservative activists and influencers and posters. I don't even know what to call some of these folks, just people who are active in the discourse on the right, proposing that we create lists of anyone who has, they will say it's anyone who cheered on the murder. But it kind of turns out to mean a lot of people who have just said negative things about Charlie Kirk. And then they're pushing for those people to be fired, especially from public institutions. And so you have folks like Florida Congressman Randy Fine, who said that those celebrating the death of Charlie Kirk must be thrown out of civil society. If you are aware of anyone in the 6th District of Florida, or heck, anywhere in the state who works at any level of government, works for an entity that gets money from the government, healthcare, university, or holds a professional license, he specifically mentions lawyers here and teachers, that is publicly celebrating the violence, please contact my office. I will demand their firing, defunding, and license revocation. So, Matt Welch, that seems bad, right?
Publicly celebrating the death. All right, let's work our way through this. What if my 10-year-old's teacher publicly celebrated the death of Charlie Kirk? What should I do?
I don't know.
It's an open question. Open question on the table.
Anybody
what I
else
would do is say, like, that's bad. You shouldn't do that. That's real bad.
Would you tell them, or would you inform the principal of the school?
I'm working myself through that. I think I would start with the person, but I might go PTA, I might go principal. If it's public, if it's in a way that's discoverable by my kid, that a teacher is publicly celebrating. It's not like tweeting something like, okay, enough of the flag at half staff. He wasn't that actually a great guy. I think that's garbage in its own way, but it's different qualitatively. But publicly celebrating it, if you are in a position either working for the government or in a position of you're supposed to, administer services to the broad population, I think is bad. I think making lists is terrible, and those lists that we've seen already circulate are just awful, and they do include a lot of people who didn't do anything like publicly celebrating. They were mostly sort of yeah-butting, or this is terrible and kind of thing. All that's bad, and I presume that the vast majority of policies on this are going to be bad. And Donald Trump is about the least reliable, trustworthy narrator when it comes to political violence in America. For two big reasons. One of them is that he pardoned everybody pretty much for January 6th, where there was people committing and convicted of violence against other Americans and law enforcement as well at a heightened political moment, that is incompatible with being serious about political violence. And that said, if my doctor said something like that publicly, that I wouldn't rat him out to anybody, but I would certainly go to a different doctor. I think that's a really bad way to behave. And it's also,
it is a bad way to behave, but that suggests that you as an individual can make a choice about whether you're going to that doctor. And that's not what Congressman Randy Fine is talking about.
I think that there is a lot of people are getting very excited about what some nurse who lives 3,000 miles away from them said on TikTok. I don't think that's a great way to go through life. I don't think that's a great use of one's time on social media. I do think that being aware of your immediate surroundings and interacting directly with people who suggest such things or who are part of your life and express things one way or the other is where the appropriateness level stands. I don't think a national solution to these things is ever going to work out, most likely. But I think this all begins in your immediate circle around you, and calling for a tip line and making lists. It's not even that it's not going to end well. It starts unwell as well.
Catherine, what do you think about this? I mean, the kind of hypothetical that Matt poses here, where a kid's teacher is posting online, perhaps in a forum where the kids are not likely to see it, but where it is public, and saying, celebrating Charlie Kirk's death, or just saying something kind of ill-advised and awful about this. There are people who say, well, look, this isn't cancel culture. That's not what this is, because that person has disqualified themselves from being a teacher, especially in a public school setting, because you cannot remain a good, effective, kind of neutral teacher if that's the stuff that you are posting online. And I said that Randy Fine's tweet was bad, and I think it's bad. On the other hand, I don't have kids. I don't have kids in school. I don't have to make these decisions, but I am sympathetic to that view that you don't want teachers who are out there engaging in the kind of the worst of the discourse that we have seen, and then educating kids. So how do you, as a libertarian, as a mother with a couple of kids in school, make these decisions and think about this question?
Yeah, I mean, I guess my first place to start is like, if it's for the children, I'm already suspicious of it. And I know that that's sort of too flip, but like...
Do your kids know that?
They do. They know it better than anyone, Peter. And so I think just the keep it away from my kids, it's for the children. Like already my kind of little libertarian antenna are up. Like, let's just keep an eye on where this is headed. If I'm going to go the ideological path on this, I'm going to say like, yeah, the reason we are in this situation where someone thousands of miles away has an opinion about what a public school teacher says is because public school teachers exist and are paid by the government. If I have a problem with something that one of my kids who are at private school, one of my kids' teachers say, the path is very clear. I can talk to the teacher. I can talk to the administration of the school. I can stop paying the school to educate my children and have them educated elsewhere. And all of those seem to me to be like reasonable adult human interactions that we have when we find ourselves to be a part of a social group or a commercial transaction where one of the parties has done something gross. And I think that the creation of public institutions that have real control over people's lives gets us in this problem where everyone kind of does deserve to have an opinion. And also the natural form of that interaction should just be a one-to-one or one-to-few. But I will also say the is it or is it not cancel culture question, I kind of was hoping we were all done with that conversation. And I guess we'll never be done. I accept that we'll never be done. But I do think that the kind of the Robbie Suave definition is the one that I typically adhere to, where you kind of have to have all of these different components. And one is that it's a relatively isolated comment, often something in the past or for which someone was sorry. And that you do have to have a kind of brigading or like piling on by people who do not otherwise have a natural interest in this person's life to put pressure to ruin their livelihood or their kind of personal life. And I think all of those pieces have come into play in the Kirk fallout, but not in every instance. I think there are many instances where it's perfectly fine for an employer to just say, I don't like what you said in public and you're not employed here anymore. like
Well,
at-will employment is important.
It's obviously more complicated in some ways when that person is employed as a instructor, teacher, some sort of faculty member
It isn't.
at a
Maybe.
public
I don't know.
university, at a public university or a publicly funded. You're right. I mean, this is so I just want to, Nick, get you to react to this, but I want to sort of set this up with a quote from Nico Perino, who is a bigwig at the Foundation for Individual Rights and Expression, one of the great free speech organizations. This is a tweet. "We are now summarily firing public university professors. Free speech and due process be damned. Haven't seen anything like it since the summer of 2020, right? During the pandemic, right after George Floyd. And even then, I don't remember so many governors and lieutenant governors publicly announcing their unconstitutional purges." This is in response to a tweet from Governor Larry Roden about the Board of Regents firing a university or preparing to fire a University of South Dakota professor for something that this professor said about Charlie Kirk. I mean, this just seems like a very bad place that we have gotten ourselves into.
I would reel it back a little bit further, and FIRE was involved in this years ago, but after 9/11. That was when there was a massive kind of response to academics who, then it wasn't Twitter because Twitter didn't exist, but it was academics who said anything, kind of ambivalent about the horrors of 9/11 and whatnot. So I don't think this is quite an issue of private versus public institutions, because regardless of the fact is that because we know more what people are thinking about every issue or every news event, that is what is making this more broad-based and things like that. So in the past, nobody would have known what the professor at the University of South Dakota was thinking, and nobody would have cared. So it comes up now. There was a case,
but that's social media. I mean, we start here by saying, so you're not, bothered by social media.
I am not bothered by social media
in the way that Matt Welch is, right?
Yeah.
But at the same time, we know things now because of social media.
That's right.
We know
right.
everyone is thinking. We know all of these awful thoughts that are in people's heads.
And
that
we should
changes the way we think about other people.
We should respond accordingly by not really not caring that much. Or else we are going to stay in a perpetual state of outrage because you realize that your doctor may have, a position on Gaza and Israel, or on, gun laws generally, or on, sidewalks. I don't, like everything. And when you know more about everything that everybody is thinking that you're interacting with, the thing that you have to do when you live in a more transparent society is to avert your gaze when you're looking through glass houses and seeing people who are naked all the time, right? Literally or figuratively.
I agree with this in many ways, but just very quickly, like that suggests maybe stay off of social media. And that's not what you were saying earlier.
Yeah, no, I know, because first off, the idea of social media is like you have to break it down. That's it's all word based, right? Because people are either writing or saying words. Maybe the problem is literacy. Maybe the problem is people are speaking. It's like what social media means. What I'm arguing is that social media is not a negative force in our lives overall. And it's like when you start to learn more about people's belief systems because they have become present to us, one of the things that you do, instead of arguing all the time with everybody about every issue, is you kind of let things go. And all I'm saying right now is that this is not necessarily a public-private issue. There's a case of an American Airlines pilot who was being dragged, and I saw American Airlines actually responded. He had said something horrible in relation to Charlie Kirk being killed. He seemed to enjoy it. And then somebody pointed that out to American Airlines, and American Airlines was like, we're already taking care of this. We don't know what that is, but it's a private institution. Am I supposed to now assume, okay, maybe I should never fly American Airlines again, et cetera? It's like, the public-private thing doesn't matter here. In FIRE circumstances, it does in the narrow sense that public universities are held to different standards than private institutions when it comes to things like respecting the First Amendment, because they're partly publicly funded and things like that. I think the larger issue here is, are you going to live in a state of perpetual outrage, which social media definitely enables, but it's a choice. Because I've learned a lot of things about a lot of people I know that I kind of, all things being equal, I wish I'd never known. I wish that I did not know that Matt Welch is obsessed with Angels baseball. And you
no
learn
way to not know that one.
You learn to ignore it
media,
or leave it alone or engage it or whatever. But I don't. So I'm not even sure what we're at right now. But it's, if you want to live in a world, in a state of perpetual outrage, this is a great moment for you. But that's a choice, and it's probably the wrong choice.
Okay, so I just want to finish this discussion by asking kind of what we do. What do we do individually as individual humans who have to make our own choices? But then also, is there some sort of appropriate policy response to the Kirk shooting and the outrage and this sort of sense of despair, the kind of the arguments? I mean, is there something that should happen here in the aftermath of this horrific political violence? Matt Welch, what do you do personally? And is there a policy response that is a good one?
We have had since 2015 a left and right embrace of apocalyptic politics, where we're not going to have a country anymore if we don't do X, which is a very typical Donald Trump thing. Ben Carson comparing everything, Obamacare and whatever, to Nazis. We've forgotten about how much Gifted Hands was just constantly talking about totalitarian things. The left, obviously, comparing Trump constantly to Hitler. The New Republic putting a little Hitler mustache on him.
If I may, the only two national politicians who actually likened Trump to Hitler were J.D. Vance and Robert F. Kennedy Jr.
I think that probably there were more. I saw that as well, but I'm pretty sure we saw some more of that. But the Flight 93 election, we literally have to take the plane of state and crash it, because otherwise the election of Hillary Clinton is likenable to terrorists blowing us up. Bernie Sanders, very, very apocalyptic. We're not going to have a society. Democrats, people left of center talking about climate change. Like, it's all over in 10 years. I mean, the stakes are constant. Talked about my school. They're having a march of third graders about to do climate action now. Like, what are we, and I'm sure there's going to be a lot of apocalypse about that. But the thing is,
how are the Angels doing with this, Matt?
Thankfully,
Speaking
the apocalypse for the Angels is always real.
It's just called September.
So part of this is to, in real time for me, I wouldn't impose my beliefs on Nick Gillespie as he marinates in the social media that he despises, but is to reject apocalyptic rhetoric and point out where it's wrong, which is always. This is how you get populism. This is how you get a totalizing demonization of entire swaths of people, and you then convince yourself that they are maximally trying to inflict damage on you and your children. It's crazy, but it's also increasingly has been the norm over the last 10 years. I don't think that it is a coincidence that this rise in politics has been accompanied by what I think is a rise in assassination attempts on major politicians, on some of the political violence that we've seen. And so start by addressing that. And for me, yes, it is to change the way that I consume information, to de-emphasize social media streams being central to it. Doesn't mean you outlaw a damn thing. You asked about policy. A main policy is something that no one will ever do, which is to make Washington less important to us. When we're all focusing wherever we sit on national politics all the time, while having complete ignorance about the stuff that actually affects ourselves and our families, of course, and that national politics is going to have all this effect. If the president decides he's going to sell or ban TikTok tomorrow, we're going to find out. It is when people are going to fixate on where all the power and all the energy, psychic balance is located. So it's going to satisfy no one, and it'll never happen because no one willingly gives up power except in extreme circumstances. But that's my policy response.
Catherine Mingy-Ward, what is your 3-point agenda here for individuals and for policymakers?
So one thing that I've been struck by is, and this is not a novel observation, but the extent to which, especially people who tended to be in this group who celebrated or at least or maybe overly positive about Kirk's death, didn't really know anything about what he actually said. That there was this kind of fundamental confusion and misunderstanding between Kirk, who was not someone I agreed with all the time, but also absolutely for sure not the most extreme of the kind of depths of right-wing, internet.
He was sort of James Dobson crossed with Rush Limbaugh for a young MAGA crowd, right? And he had that set of views adapted for the Trump era.
And so I do think, I sometimes have been guilty of saying, well, people on the left think such and such, or people on the right think such and such, and then making a little cluster that contains people who disagree with each other, importantly. Obviously, there are lots of libertarians that I get grouped in, which I would throw out of my house if they showed up for dinner. And I think it's very, very important to not make that mistake of clustering people together who do not share all of their views. And so I think, when someone does it to you, you're very sensitive to it. You say, oh, no, look, there are all these subtleties between me and the people that you see as the same as me. And I just really saw a ton of that, a real inability to distinguish between Charlie Kirk and some of the much darker, much grosser corners of the internet right. Not to say that those people deserve to be shot either. They absolutely do not. That is not how we behave, America. But I guess the thing that I've taken away is to be really, really careful about lumping people into a political cluster and suggesting that conclusions can be drawn. I do that sometimes, and I thought to myself, I got to be more careful about that. Not least because, as Jesse Walker has written, I think very, very compellingly, it hardly even makes sense to make clusters of people politically anymore in some kinds of way. We've talked on this podcast over and over about the horseshoe and the ways that left and right are overlapping in confusing ways. So when Trump says stuff like the real problem is the left, not the right, I think that comes out of a place where people are kind of instrumentally unwilling to make distinctions between more extreme and less extreme. Of course, this happens also, trans ideology, right? Like it's the same. There are plenty of trans people minding their business, doing moderate shit. And then there's a couple of crazy people in every demographic category. And to just be really, really careful not to treat all of that as one and the same.
Yeah, Trump has jumped to a kind of apocalypticism about the left, a kind of radicalism there. But there are folks on the right who say, well, look, our response here to try to crack down on leftist speech and NGOs and to go after the funding centers and all of that, that is a response to the left and their apocalyptic rhetoric, and that the left's apocalyptic rhetoric about Trump, about how he is kind of a fascist or he's subverting democracy, created a permission structure, they will say, that made it possible, that helped lead us to the moment where somebody decided that it was worth it to kill Charlie Kirk, and that's why they can say they killed him. That's why they can say it was their fault. It was the whole group rather than the one individual who pulled the trigger. Nick, let's close out with you. What should individuals do, and what should policymakers or people interested in politics do?
I think as individuals, and this is something that I, when I talk to people about this, or also, while discussing it on social media or wherever, the first thing is to do, we have an understandable but unfortunate tendency to try to evacuate a bloody, violent tragedy and immediately superimpose our ideological beliefs on it. It's a way of comforting. We did this after 9/11. We do this after every possible tragedy. And one is to force people to sit with the violence, to sit with the corpses that are created by political violence, because that brings home the reality of how horrible it is and how terrible it is, how inexcusable ultimately it is. I think that's one of the first things that you can do personally and on a kind of individual basis. The second thing is to discuss where does political violence come from and whether or not we are in a place that has a permission structure that allows for it or actually advocates and causes it. I would argue if we look Nobody wants to go back to the late 60s and early 70s when there was bombings every day, assassinations were everywhere and things like that. And if you look back, it was not because of social media. There was an intellectual and cultural ideology at work. And I did before this, beyond groups like the Red Brigades, the PLO, the IRA, the Weather Underground, the Red Army faction, a series of groups that by the end of the 60s had said using the political process to affect change was a mug's game. H. Rap Brown, who went from the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee to joining the Black Panthers, personified this shift where he said people like Martin Luther King, who was being derided as Martin Luther Queen, shortly before he was assassinated. It was like, MLK was an idiot for thinking that you can do anything through political process. Of course, he was going to be killed by a society that would not allow for civil rights or for poor people's rights. They became architects of violence. They wrote books. This started with Franz Fanon, but Mao's Little Red Book, which called for revolutionary violence, was published by Bantam as a paperback in 1966. Regis Debray, Eldridge Cleaver with Soul on Ice, multiple books by George Jackson, Huey Newton. The Camp of the Saints on a right-wing basis was published by Scribner's. These were not fringe texts. These were books that were promulgating revolutionary violence as the only means necessary. Or the only means possible to actually affect social change. This was in mainstream culture. The New York Times positively reviewed H. Rap Brown's memoir, which I can't even say the name of now because it is so foul, where he talked about violence in America as being violence is as American as cherry pie. We need to go back and understand that if we start to permit and if we start talking about violence in those terms, we are going to see more of it. And one of the good things is that for all of this stochastic violence that has happened, which is unpredictable violence that seems obviously related to a general discourse, we don't have that kind of ideology at work now. And that's a good thing. And we should lean into that. And we need to talk more about how we change things peacefully in nonviolent ways. There's that. But then when it comes to policy questions, Peter, it's like, what Trump is so far sketching out. And if he starts unleashing the FCC, the FTC, the FBI, all of the alphabet organizations to go after groups that engage in wrongthink, that's really, really bad. And when you see censorship, people calling for the end of social media, after Columbine, it was violent video games. Before that, it was violent movies or violent comic books, et cetera. Like, recognize that the medium is not the message here. Or it certainly is not the cause of this kind of stuff. And we need to push back against that. The answer to violence is never to clamp down on speech. It's always to have better and more conversations.
Yeah. I think the answer here, that my recommendations are be angry, because this is worth being angry about, and be sad, but don't dwell on it, and resist despair and resist doom and resist thinking that we have to solve our problems through politics. We have many problems as a society, as a country to solve, but it is up to us, not to politicians. And the fractures in society are not going to be solved from the top down with laws and terrible ideas and terrible tweets. All right, let's move on to our next segment, which is a listener question. We're going to keep this light this week. It comes from Mark, who writes, all of you have a rack of books behind you during the podcast. Due to my old eyes and the resolution of my monitor, I cannot read the books, hardly any of them. Can you perhaps tell us about a few of them and what they are? Matt Welch, you want to start by telling us about a book on your bookshelf?
Yeah, sure. Right behind me is a fantastic book called McCain, The Myth of the Maverick from 2007. You can see him.
That smoke, it smoked out McCain with something. What did
I think it was
smoke
gusto.
with?
Perhaps some gusto.
Gusto. Anyways, that's there. And then all the books there, that's just my McCain shelf. So all or most of the books that he wrote or co-wrote with Mark Salter. It's a Cindy McCain book there that I haven't read. Mark Salter's autobiography, but the one that's really interesting that I talked about in my book that almost no one has ever read or talked about is called John McCain, An Essay in Military and Political History by John Karagak. which is just like a pretty dense look at his military career. It was published about 20 years ago plus, and fascinating, like a really good study on him. So for McCainologists, that might be one of the best texts out there. But that's just basically my McCain shelf. The end.
Nick Gillespie, do you want to tell us about your bookshelf?
Yeah, I pulled off the two books that I'm going over regularly now are first, Great Expectations by Landon Y. Jones. I've referenced it a fair amount on podcasts over the past year, but it was published in the early 80s. It's by a baby boomer, and it's about the leading edge of the baby boom as they move into positions of institutional power and clout. And it's fascinating because virtually everything that we are talking about related to millennials and Gen Z is almost exactly the same conversations that were being had about baby boomers and about how they would inherit a world that was ashes, that they would never get their parents' standards of living. I mean, it is amazing, and it is kind of brilliantly ironic because boomers are now the enemy, and in here they are the heroes, but it's basically the same narrative we're having. And the other book that was on my shelf that I took down for this was from Chocolate to Morphine by Andrew Weil and Winifred Rosen, which was a book that I read when it came out in college, or I was in college when it came out. And it just puts all psychoactive substances on a continuum. It's a brilliant way of thinking about drugs and what kind of drug policy we should have after that.
All right. So my two books, I've got a lot of science fiction novels on the shelves behind me. But the ones I actually want to talk about today are cocktail books, because I collect cocktail books. And here is one of my favorites here. This is the Oxford Companion to Spirits and Cocktails. It's a reference book by David Wondrich and Noah Rothbaum, who are two great sort of cocktail writers and historians. They just know absolutely everything there is to know about booze and cocktails. And I really love reference books. And I really love sort of big, meaty reference books that you can just kind of open up and learn something interesting about a topic, about a niche topic, right, that you are interested in. And so this book has sort of miniature histories of almost everything that you would ever want to know about booze. If you want to learn about the entire history of the Negroni, you can find it in here, but also about Campari and also about Wild Turkey and right, all of these sort of different types and brands of alcohol, influential figures. And it's just a sort of fascinating kind of, it's almost like a self-contained Wikipedia in the sense that you can just follow these rabbit holes and anything that you want to know, or sort of things you did not know that you wanted to know, you will discover just opening this to a random page. And so if you are at all interested in the history and the sort of the lore of booze and cocktails, the Oxford Companion to Spirits and Cocktails is a great book, and I strongly recommend it. Catherine, what do you got for us?
Behind me are books entirely by women in my personal libertarian pantheon. And I'm so excited that someone finally asked so I could talk about it. I have back behind me, I got Virginia Postrel. I got Rose Wilder Lane. I got Deirdre McCloskey. I've got Lionel Shriver. I was expansive in my definition of libertarian, and I guess also my definition of woman. And I think that anyone who would like a reading list, I'm happy to take a photo and share this stack of books because every single one of them is a banger. So when people are like, where are the lady libertarians? The answer is, I don't know, just writing many of the foundational texts of the ideology. Thanks for asking.
Where are the lady libertarians? Turns out the answer is behind Catherine Mangue-Ward on her podcast. All right, let's go to our final segment here. What have you been watching, consuming, otherwise reading, etc., in the cultural sphere? Matt Welch, let's start with you.
I attended on Friday a crackerjack presentation at the Lasting Joy Brewery in Tivoli, New York, by the official historian of Dutchess County, whose name is William P. Tatum III.
He
gave a slideshow as part of the ongoing Rev 250 celebrations, Revolutionary War 250th anniversaries. I gave a presentation on the very ill-fated and kind of hilariously awful attempted American invasion of Canada in 1775, led by Montgomery, I think the guy was, and then Benedict Arnold in a pincer movement. It was terrible. The guy was really, really funny. Slideshow. There was like 35 people. Man, I think I was the youngest or the second youngest there. And it was at a beautiful brewery, and it was really fun. And I mention this not because you can go and experience that yourself because it's over. But A, it was awesome. B, it was you're out with actual human beings and Americans and interacting with them and even enjoying a fine cocktail, Peter Suderman, and some nice home brewed and stuff things there, brewery, etc. But also because every single county, city, wherever in America, I guarantee you somewhere has a program like this talking about the Revolutionary War. They're gearing it up. It's already happened. I mean, 1775, the war was on. So like it's happening now. You can experience it even in places that don't have as much of the history that's connected with the Revolutionary War, like west of the Mississippi River, for example. Guarantee you that there are local historical society events happening there. Go there. It's awesome. You get to hang out with Americans and also not be on social media listening or reading Nick Gillespie's tweets. It's just a win-win for everybody involved. So go check it out.
Nick Gillespie, you were name checked. So what do you have for us?
So the book that I have consumed a lot of, and a lot of its recommendations, is Modern Psychedelics, the Handbook for Mindful Exploration by Joe Dolce, who's long ago was the editor of Details magazine when it was one of the trend-setting magazines in the country. But it is a handbook about what psychedelics are, what their promises are, how to use them, not how to find them because they are illegal, and that remains a problem for all sorts of reasons. But Joe Dolce's book, if you're interested in why more people in all kinds of circumstances, at all levels of society, are more interested in psychedelics, this is the book to read. He's also the subject of my a Reason interview that's coming out this Wednesday. So if you're at all interested, subscribe to the Reason interview with Nick Gillespie, and you will see Joe Dolce talking about why psychedelics may be one of the things that's going to get us from this terrible timeline to a much more peaceful, expansive, happy, productive, and loving one.
Catherine Mingy-Ward, take us out of this terrible timeline.
I actually took myself out of the terrible timeline a little this weekend and went on a trip with some girlfriends. There were 6 of us, and so we needed a large-ish vehicle to get around. And I used Turo for the first time to rent a car. And I will never be renting a car from a regular car rental place again. This is a great, great example of how a Airbnb style model works so much better and was should always have been our destiny. There's an app. The app makes sense. You search for a car. The car is where you actually want it to be. You communicate directly with the person who owns the car. This is people renting out their own privately owned vehicles. And the pricing is transparent, and the accountability on damage to the car is transparent. And in this particular case, the person literally just left it in the parking lot of the airport and told me what space it was in. And I just went and got it and got into it, and we all drove away. And that, I cannot convey the joy that you feel in that moment, that you are not in line at the Hertz counter where someone is waiting to tell you there is no car. So,
and was it a Chevy Malibu? Because somehow or another, every rental vehicle for the last 40 years has been a Chevy Malibu. I think maybe even before Chevy Malibus existed.
It was not. That was another miraculous thing. It was a nice car. Right. And I was in charge of renting it, but I am not and should not be ever in charge of driving. And it was very, very easy to add several other drivers to the car without it being weirdly a federal case, which it is when you try to rent a car from a rental car agency. Listen, this is not a sponsored post. I just was so struck by, the internet really made my life better in this way. And so Turo was good. We've actually done some reporting for many years now on how regulators everywhere are trying to drive this company out of business.
Yeah.
And
that's what I was going to ask next is what laws are being proposed to ban this?
The many laws. I'd say we're at some equilibrium now, but there's always a new wave of attempts by kind of bricks and mortar establishment players to ban app-based solutions to their incompetence, and Turo is probably in danger. So help a brother out.
So my cultural consumption was not about driving, it was about walking. I watched the movie The Long Walk. It's an adaptation of the Stephen King book published in the late 1970s under the Richard Bachman pen name that he used for a while. He was actually, I believe it was the first book he ever started writing as a much younger man. And this was maybe not the best movie to have watched the day after Charlie Kirk's murder. But it is a pretty good film, and it's something that is stuck with me in a bunch of ways. And so a bunch of people have said that this movie, which is about a bunch of boys in a sort of post-apocalyptic future America who are set to go for a long walk, which is literally they just keep walking until they have to stop, at which point they are killed. And there's a winner. It's kind of a Hunger Games style competition. In fact, this movie is directed by the guy who did the 3 of the 4 Hunger Games films. And a bunch of people have said, well, this is just a kind of a metaphor for the demands of capitalism, right? This is a movie about, sort of how we expect people to just keep walking and keep doing stuff for society. And that is... Look, I kind of understand where those folks are coming from, but that is a crazy interpretation of this movie, because this movie is extremely anti-state. It is about a government that sponsors this sort of murderous competition and demands that these kids participate in it, these young men participate in it, because it's going to lift the people up and give hope to the state and increase GDP after a failed war. And you can kind of see, Stephen King was writing this early, as he was, I don't know, maybe 20 years old or something like that, maybe even a teenager when he started writing this. And this is just very clearly an anti-state metaphor for Vietnam and for the draft. And it's actually kind of surprising how much this movie allows that Vietnam metaphor to persist, doesn't really try to update it for today's politics and today's discourse, right? But what's interesting about it, and what I've been thinking about a lot, is this really is a movie about the kind of existential despair of being a young person, and specifically of being a young man in the kind of broad post-war America. And, you think about it, and sure, you can say, it's about capitalism. You could probably also find some way to say it's about the Great Recession. It's about Iraq, right? It's about, the Afghanistan, whatever it is that men are being dragged into. But really, it's very clearly and specifically about Vietnam, but it's about all of these things. And it's just a reminder that there's this sense of being young and feeling like the world just isn't right, like it doesn't care, like it's going to sacrifice you, like it's just using you for sport. And that sense has been around for a long time. It's not new. It's not something that came about in the internet age or since the Great Recession or under Trump. And in one way, understanding that this sense has persisted is kind of dark. But it's also a reminder that it's something that people can get through, that society can live through, that other people have been there and might even understand what it's like. And maybe it's not quite as dark and despairing as it sometimes seems. All right, folks, that is our show for this week. Remember, you can watch Reason debate National Review about immigration in Washington, D.C. on October 2nd. You check out all the details for the next Reason Versus event at reason.com/events. As always, if you like this podcast, you can support us by going to reason.com/donate. That is reason.com/donate. Thank you so much for listening. The Reason Roundtable will return.